You love him from his podcast. People ask me, I got a couple of emails, and I referred people to this man's podcast. It's called Around the Political World with John Rothmann. He does it every day. It's 10 minutes, and I recommend you subscribe. He is so kind to come here. I think he also appears on Nikki's show. When we put up the bat beam, he'll show up on short notice, and his regular slot is now. And we always make him wait, which I feel guilty about, but we'll try to get better as the year progresses. He's the great John Rothmann, everyone.
Can I just dovetail and say, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here.
Ladies and gentlemen, I adore you, and I want to start you with something that's not related to Donald Trump necessarily. But there was some new polling, a statewide poll, that reflects feelings among Republican voters and Democratic voters about what's happening at the border and the border crisis. It's a UC Berkeley governmental study poll. LA Times co-sponsored it. And you see how the Republicans sort of close ranks in terms of where they are on the border. And the Democrats, not so much. I wonder if you could speak to the border crisis as it relates to the politics, which is you're so good at decoding the politics of some of these complex issues, and that poll.
For Republicans, this is the major issue. You can hear it reflected on Fox every single day. In fact, this morning, while CNN was broadcasting about the hostage crisis, the Israelis that are still being held hostage, CNN was focused on the border crisis. Fox was focused on the border crisis. What the poll shows to me is there is a concern in the United States about illegal immigration and the fact that things are being flooded, if you will, by people. Will it be an issue nationally? Yes. Will it be an issue in 2024? Yes. Will it affect the votes here in California? No. And one of the things that the poll showed, and I want to commend Mark Thompson. I had not read the LA Times this morning, and Mark immediately sent it to me for commentary. The most important single thing is that the Republicans have no traction for statewide office here in California. So it really is an inconsequential issue. I would also suggest to you it is a more consequential issue in Southern California than it is in Northern California. And I think that has to do with the demographics, where people are going and how they're getting here. But there's no question that the immigration issue is going to be at the top of the list, although it was very interesting to me, listening to all the stuff coming out of Iowa, that immigration was really not an issue there. That is to say, neither Nikki Haley nor Ron DeSantis really addressed the issue of immigration. But it will be a national issue. And remember, the big immigration push is during the summer. And so come the fall, I think it'll be a major issue in the presidential campaign.
So just to the point, I think that's so well said. And it's almost like they don't have to sling the border issue around in Iowa. They can wait to sling it around in the general, which is what's going to happen.
Correct.
And voters who support former President Trump, this is the poll, we'll just button it out and then we'll move on, but are conservative or identify as Republicans or nearly unanimous. They're unanimous in saying the border is not secure. Among strongly conservative voters, again, this is how they self-identify, if you will, to use the phrase, 88% say the border is not secure versus 8% who say the border is secure. Now, those are Republicans. If you go to Democrats, liberals and voters who support Biden are more evenly divided on this question. Among California voters who identify as strongly liberal, 54% say the border is secure. 30% say it's not. And then Democrats are also split on the question of whether unauthorized immigrants create a burden for the country. This, I think, it really speaks to the issue, John, because as you say, it will be the issue potentially in the general. And whether or not these immigrants create a burden for the country, overall, 42% of registered voters say migrants are a major burden. 42%. 30% say they're a minor burden, and 22% say they are not a burden. So even in this place, California, where we have an immigration issue, and as you say, it's an issue with a capital I, the further south you get, you see the divisions, and you see how we, on the one hand, I think, know, even if it's unspoken, that we need immigration. And by the same token, we're concerned about illegal immigration and a flood of illegal immigrants.
You've stated it perfectly. If I were in the Republican Party in California, I would make this a major issue. But the Republican Party in California virtually is defunct. I hate to say it, and many of you will be upset to hear it, but they have no spokesperson on the statewide level. And so I don't see it as a real issue. The odds are, although one never knows, that in the Senate race here in California, the runoff will be between two Democrats, although there's a chance that
could be Garvey.
Garvey, his reputation is not as a politician, it's an athlete. Will that be enough to generate it? I don't know.
It was enough to get him pretty close. I mean, at least in recent polling. But and of course, if it's Garvey and Schiff, for example, likely, it would. Then it's a cakewalk for Schiff, right? I mean, it's
don't
almost
count out
immaterial.
Katie Porter.
Katie
Porter may end up as the opponent. Something I oppose here in California is that it's the top two, even if they're from the same political party. And that, to me, is very concerning. I want a choice, not an echo.
Right. Well said. Delwood asks this, just doubling back. Mark and John, is the border now secure? Yes or no?
Yes, the border is secure in a broad general sense. When the Republicans say, or when Donald Trump says, that terrorists and murderers and so forth are coming across our border, I don't see that reflected in the statistics. What I see is a great debate that really has to take place over two things: asylum, what is asylum, and number two is deportation. Who was the deporter in chief? It wasn't Donald Trump, it was Barack Obama. This is not a new problem. This is a continuing problem, and building a wall won't solve the problem of people wanting to get into the United States. I learned something a long time ago. I was in Mexico in the 1960s, and all the television programs from America were being beamed into Mexico. And I had people say, "Oh, my dream is to go to America." And I asked why, and they said, "Well, look, you guys have nice houses, you have food on the table, everybody has a job. We wish we had that in Mexico." So part of it is a situation we've created. And the other problem really is the instability in Central and South America. And that is a serious issue.
Well, this is the point, and you mentioned it. The asylum laws have broadened to a degree, and you can seek asylum status in this country in ways you might not have been able to seek it in 30 years ago. There are more threats, violence coming out of these countries to which you've referred. And so you can come to the border of America and you can claim you can petition for asylum status, and you can claim, hey, I'm fleeing violence. And as I say, the rules are broad enough that they allow you to seek that status. But again, we are overwhelmed, I would say, by the number of people who either want asylum status or refugee status of some kind, and our ability to process those people. I mean, so we are, I think, overrun.
You're correct. Yeah. People want to come to the United States. And when you ask people why they want to come, some flee violence, but most of the people that I've talked to, and I talk to an awful lot of people on this subject, say they come here for their children. They want a better life for their children, which they cannot get in their country of origin. So whether it's El Salvador or Guatemala, and by the way, most of these people coming in with asylum are not coming from Mexico. They're coming from the Central and South American countries, primarily to be free of the drug cartels who really control a lot of this traffic. So I don't have an answer for it, but I don't see it affecting the 2024 election. In the sense that the state of California, for instance, is never going to vote for a Republican for president of the United States.
Well, I would just say one thing about coming to this country because you want a better life for your children. That's not asylum status. You cannot grant asylum status to people who just want to come to this country because they want a better life for their child.
No, but you can claim that my daughter could be subject to prostitution.
Sure, that's how you get it.
Intimidated
that's how you get it.
By drug cartels. Those are real issues, and they're not issues we can solve. They have to be solved in the country of origin. And you may recall that President Biden sent Kamala Harris to meet with the 4 key nations where this is involved to try to strengthen what's going on. It doesn't work because this is not nation-to-nation situation.
That was that was the worst assignment ever. I mean, Kamala Harris is only getting bad assignments. You know, it would be like, go solve the homeless problem, solve the immigration problem. Yeah, what other incredibly impossible problems would you like me to work on? Trump's biggest Iowa gains, John Rothmann, are in evangelical areas. In the cities, he didn't do that well. I understand that he had quite the showing, John Rothmann, but his biggest showings are among those who are evangelical Christian voters and those who are not reflect no, I'm trying to think of the polite way to put this, reflect no higher education or a higher income status in their profile, if you want to think of it that way. The reverse, who didn't vote for Trump, people with higher education, people who lived in the cities generally, and people who had higher income. That's just straight up what happened in Iowa, okay? So I know the guy trounced and he did well, but there are instructive aspects to those returns, aren't there?
Oh, yes. And the other thing was interesting. I saw a poll this morning saying that 11% of Republican voters in Iowa indicated in a poll that they would not vote for Donald Trump, that they intend to vote for Joe Biden. That's a big problem for the Republican Party. They cannot win the presidency with Trump's base. It has to go beyond that. And let me tell you, on election night, or the caucus result night, what happened was fascinating. Donald Trump didn't give a fiery speech. He stuck out a hand to everybody. He said, I want to be inclusive. He even said nice things about Ron DeSantis, calling him by his name, and Nikki Haley as well. The Republicans aren't dumb. They know that Trump has to appeal to his base, but they also know that to win in November, they have to go beyond the Trump base. And so that to me is what's really intriguing.
Yes, this is the pivot that Trump already knows he has to make. And as you say, you hear it even in a softening of his rhetoric around reproductive rights for women. I mean, here's a guy who installed Federalist Society chosen justices to overturn Roe. And yet now he's kind of trying to play both ends, that these extreme legislative moves in different states, taking away women's reproductive rights in an even more draconian way, they're bad for America. So he's singing out of both sides, isn't he?
Right. And what you opened with, the whole story on the Supreme Court and the cases that are coming before the court now, absolutely spot on. You hit the nail on the head. If, for instance, the power of the EPA or other federal agencies are curbed because of a conservative Republican court, the other factor in terms of issues will be the Supreme Court as an issue in the election. And that, by the way, will also ring when you talk about presidential immunity or when you talk about whether the former president could be eliminated from ballots. Let me tell you, those will be polarizing issues. And the people who support Donald Trump or support the so-called limited government approach, if the Supreme Court does not uphold them, they will turn out in droves. But on the other hand, for other Americans, particularly Democrats, liberals, independents, if in fact the Supreme Court doesn't rule the way most of them believe, they will be mobilized to turn out. So I'm going to suggest to you another major issue in the election may be the United States Supreme Court.
Well, I would accept that, but I would say that which I opened with, and essentially completely taking the teeth out of these regulatory agencies, I don't know that lands with Americans the way Roe did, for example.
It doesn't, but it will. You start talking about clean air, clean water. You start talking about those issues in a number of states that are key swing states, it will resonate. And the other question, and I raised this in my podcast, but and I got slammed for it by some people, the question of whether or not the Trump followers essentially are a cult. Nobody who supports Trump in the way the hardcore MAGA people do ever criticize anything Trump does. I think that's going to be a real obstacle because it means that Trump will not be able to widen his base. And to win the election, he has to. He lost by 7 million votes.
Well,
And
but he could lose by 10 million. I think you pointed it out, and still win in this country with this ridiculous electoral college we have. I mean, the floor for Trump is solid. The ceiling for Trump is low.
Now, next week when we meet, we will know the New Hampshire results. So this morning, aside from listening to you, which I do avidly, and everybody should subscribe. I watch the ads that are being produced in New Hampshire by the Trump people, by the DeSantis people, by the Haley people. The most interesting thing is the DeSantis people aren't broadcasting at all. There are no ads for DeSantis in New Hampshire. But Nikki Haley and Donald Trump are going at each other, but particularly Donald Trump, who is blasting Nikki Haley. And the talk about negative ads and whether negative ads work, the whole premise of this is a negative ad. And I also want to refer to the fact that the issue of race is going to be a critical issue, because every time Nikki Haley opens her mouth on the issue of slavery or the question of whether the United States is racist, all of these issues, she's now speaking to the voters in South Carolina. Were she to make it into the general election, a lot of these things will come back to haunt her. But the odds are, and I'm speaking now as a non-betting individual, but the odds are that if the court does not stop Donald Trump, or he's not convicted of anything, even if he is convicted, he will be the Republican nominee for president. I listened this morning to the trial that is taking place right now. We all know that Donald Trump sexually abused Carol. And we also know that now comes the sentencing. What intrigued me, and I didn't know this until this morning, that in fact his comments about pussy, and I can say that because we're not on the radio, but we're just talking among ourselves here on the internet, that's now being entered into evidence. And Donald Trump can't deny what he said. But I talked to a big Trump supporter this morning who said, we don't care. We want Donald Trump to be back in the White House. And no matter what this court finds, we will vote for him. And the other thing we have to understand is that everything may be nailed down by March 5th. And so we're really having a very short season here. So can I raise one other issue? I know you have other questions, but
yes, please go ahead.
Who I would think that Donald Trump would take as his vice presidential running mate. Remember, Trump will be in his 80s if he's reelected, and who is vice president matters. So I'm going to stick my neck way out and tell you I think he will take Elise Stefanik of New York, who is the number 3 Republican in the House of Representatives, who was once a Trump critic, now a Trump supporter. She replaced Liz Cheney as the head of the Republican caucus. And so my sense is that with that kind of ticket, Donald Trump would have a vice president he can trust. It would be a woman to counterbalance Kamala Harris, and it would be someone who would not steal the limelight from him.
Right. He's the alpha male. She's a supplicant and clearly comfortable in that
but
role.
I could be wrong.
Just kissing his A.
I
think that
heard,
makes a lot of sense.
Donald Trump floated the name of well, he's floated several names of Carrie Lake out of Arizona.
That's what Calvin Wong, who's a shadow producer of this show, is saying. Carrie Lake, not Carrie Lake.
Calvin, you'll note that last night, Donald Trump, rather when the votes came in Iowa, he acknowledged Carrie Lake, who campaigned in Iowa for him. And the reason she's doing it is she would like to be the vice presidential nominee.
It's just so interesting, however they slice it. They're going to have to get that independent vote, which is why New Hampshire is so interesting, because there's so many independent voters there. And in Iowa, just to double back and look at the, education, the particularly strong divider between where Trump did best and worst. I mean, the gap in support for Trump was so wide between areas with more or less education, John Rothmann. He got 29%.
But he carried all but one county in Iowa.
Yeah.
So, getting back to
I
have a choice.
Yeah.
I think there's a real choice for vice president. It's not Tucker Carlson. I think he should tap Mark Thompson. Independent thinker, clear spoken,
Wow. Well, that would be.
But you're not a Republican. That's true.
No, that would be tough.
And you're not a Trump supporter, and you might steal the limelight.
So I think I don't check any of the boxes. It's Around the Political World with John Rothmann. His podcast is every day for 10 minutes. Kim, do you have any questions for the witness before I excuse him?
After working with John Rothmann for more than 20 years, never in my life have I heard even a swear word, a cuss word come out of his mouth. And today we get the P word from him.
I can't believe it either. He could have said any number. He could have just said P, but he went for the whole word. I just don't even.
Listen to me. I don't want to hear you.
Exactly. It was very disconcerting.
I said it so there would be no misunderstanding.
I see. Is that what you were worried about?
But you're right. But next week we will. I think next week we'll know the results of the Carroll trial.
Yes.
We will know the results of the New Hampshire primary. We will have a lot going on. And may I say, we didn't talk any foreign policy today. Last week, Kim interrogated me about the Houthis, and I just want to say very clearly that you can pronounce it Houthi or Houthi because I've heard it pronounced both ways. Oh. My friends tell me Houthi is the way, but who knows?
I've never heard it pronounced Houthi, but all right.
Neither have I, but wait.
Neither have I.
Watching what's going on? Oh, my time's up, son of a gun.
What's wrong with you? First you say the P word. Your words have upset so many people.
My words upset so many people.
God, Rothmann comes there, stirs the pot, grabs control. What's going on? I mean, would you like to apologize for using the P word before we leave, John Rothmann?
I will tell you, when Donald Trump apologizes for using that word, I will apologize. But I didn't use it. I was quoting him.
I see. All right.
I stand corrected.
Okay. Is that enough of an obfuscation?
I think it's a drop.
Obfuscation is a ding.
Be a drop. Yeah.
Thank you all. I'll see you next week. I can't wait.
John Rothmann, everybody. He can't wait to curse in your neighborhood soon. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.